All right, it's super tough to follow Dr. Greg. He's amazing. I've known him for about 10 years, and that was actually his second presentation at our event, and just love to have him, so great dude. So this year, we're doing something very different than what we've done before. We're doing panel discussions throughout the day based on popular requests. So we have obviously the other sessions where you sit down and listen to somebody giving a kind of beginning, end, and middle type of presentation, but based on some feedback that we've had over the years, we decided this year, let's try the panel thing and see how well it's received. And from what I can see in the audience, it looks like people are interested in this conversation, so that's great. So my name is Scott Smith. I work for Wit Solutions up the road, your host for today, and I'm kicking off our first panel. I want to introduce our panelists here. Nathan Fredericks from Ryder, Dora Busias from Dora B Global, and last but not least, Ryan Austin from Michigan State University Credit Union. And how about if you guys just want to take a minute, introduce yourselves?
Sure. Thanks, Scott. I've been in the automotive industry for about 21 years, logistics, I should say, supply chain. As many of you may know, like auto comes with a lot of very short notice problems, right? Just-in-time operations. I started in engineering, was problem solving, but on a longer time scale. And as I've moved more into operations, you're talking minutes that cost thousands of dollars. So, data and decision making is important. And I'm happy to be here. Enjoyed the keynote as well. No tough act to follow, right? No sharks up here today.
Exactly.
No sharks. I wouldn't know what to do with that either. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Dora Busias. So I spent 30 years in corporate, and I worked across industries as well, finance, healthcare, retail, education, and so forth. Always doing data and analytics and enterprise architecture. But over the years, I was always trying to share the lessons that I was learning, coach, mentor, teach, speak on conferences. So really just over the summer, I made a big pivot where I left corporate to build my own business, but really my mission is how do I help the next generation of data leaders and growth-driven individuals and women in tech that I can relate to with the strategic initiatives in data and tech and also career and leadership coaching. And it's great to be here with you this morning.
Ryan Austin, like I said, MSU Federal Credit Union was a great landing place. I came from manufacturing. Spent many years in IT, from network engineering all the way through enterprise architecture and data engineering, and switched into financial services in the last 2 years, kind of repeating some of the successes that I had in the manufacturing space around data, and moving data and building insights to actions and things like that. So excited to kind of talk about that.
All right, thank you. So a little joke, this was going to be part of my opening presentation, but somehow didn't make the slides. But how many agentic AI bots does it take to change a light bulb? Anybody? 10. Of course, it's got to be 10 or 5 or some number like that. So 1, to go to Copilot and look up instructions for how to change a light bulb. 9, to post it on LinkedIn, but never say anything about light bulbs. So much hype in the AI space. You're supposed to laugh, but that's okay. But thank you for that. But there's so much hype with AI, and I talked to a bunch of our customers, and I know that there's some great things that are going on with Gen AI. There's always been a backdrop of machine learning, across the board for several years now. But regular old school analytics is still getting it done, still super important to organizations, still super important for decision making. So the questions today are going to be around that topic. So what are we still doing in analytics that's adding a lot of value? So my first question, and I guess Ryan, I'll ask you, why do traditional analytics still have so much importance? What is the ongoing benefit that big companies still want to invest a lot of dollars in this?
Well, I see it a lot as organizations mature. Are they ready for more advanced analytics? I see a lot of organizations still struggling to do just data literacy and really understanding how to make decisions and leverage data to take action on items. And so moving into this kind of leap into AI and some of these other things, I think it's great that the emphasis is there now and people are starting to realize it. People are attending these conferences and they want to know more about it. But there's this fundamental concept of being able to interpret what you see and do something with it. And there's a lot of data curious people that are like, ooh, that's a cool data point, I'll put that in a slide. But how do you really take action and move towards seeing the value of interpreting the data, having it presented in a way that matters, and being able to see the value in what that data is telling you to do something.
All right. What do you think, Dora? The value of traditional analytics, why is it still super important?
Well, I think it's still there, we're using it. I mean, this is kind of like the tentacles of octopus, where they're ingrained in the organization. The processes are there, analytics are there. Just not long ago, I was speaking with a colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine, and they're working on really doing a big analytics project, and it's all about back orders. AI is great, and I'm a proponent for embracing the technology, but also we need to keep in mind that it's not one size fits all. There's still a lot of knowledge, processes, and different problems that we're trying to solve that AI may not be the right technology, the right practice for it. So it doesn't mean that it's here to replace everything we've done, but it's how do we now integrate that with everything else we have, because we want to keep on taking advantage of leveraging all of the investment, the time, the effort, the money, the knowledge that we've put into our existing data and analytics. I'll offer just one other thought, and I think we had talked about this. The other thing to think about is how do we even define analytics, right? And can AI do everything again? For me, analytics, and by the way, I spent a lot of time and energy doing data governance over my 30 years in corporate. And you kind of start with definitions. What do things mean? So even something as simple as analytics, is that the dashboards, the BI side? Is that the data warehousing, the data lakes? Is that engineering? Is that architecture? Is that all the pipelines? Is that part of it? And there might be pieces that AI can do parts of it, but I don't know that it can replace all of it, at least not yet.
Yeah, I don't think it's one for one. Like Dora was saying, a lot of decisions just require some simple data, some simple dashboards. A lot of my customers, they might just say, I need to know what my trending, truck utilization is or my cost per unit. I'm not looking for an interface or a bot I can chat with about it. And so I think we're trying to be cognizant that we don't overcomplicate things with AI. I can remember early on in my career as an engineer, you might have to marry up a couple data sets and bounce this off of that, or you're trying to populate some new stuff and you're like, okay, I'm gonna do a VLOOKUP and I'm gonna concatenate this. And and 2 hours later, my boss would be like, Nate, there was only 10 lines there. Like you could have just typed it in, there was no need to go through all the formulas for something like that. And I think that's kind of where we're at with AI. Is it's early yet, and we're trying to figure out what the business cases are that are going to have a good ROI to actually use AI.
That's actually a great segue into the next question is, with so much hype around AI, and there are some documented use cases where value has been achieved, but because of the hype, the investment strategy for big companies seems to be pushing in that space maybe a little too far and maybe not spending as much money on traditional. So, Ryan, do you have any thoughts about how to address the skepticism around the old-fashioned way of doing things versus the shiny new stuff?
Yeah, I look at it, for those that remember when the internet was really taking off, and I compare and contrast to that. There was a lot of hype, a lot of money spent on building out business-to-business, e-commerce, all that other stuff in the early 2000s. And it kind of, that bubble hit, and then it became normal. I see the same type of trajectory happening with AI, where there's this big investment, there's this big bubble, and people are really excited about it, and people are going to be let down into some degree with those investments because it's not happened fast enough, it's not doing what I expected it to do. And then all of a sudden, it'll kind of quietly trend down, but it'll still be here, and then it'll slowly transform things in the background because we'll figure out how to leverage it, we'll figure out how to do it. A lot of the things that I've been trying to temper is one around the cost of it, but you're paying sometimes for an AI model that does a specialty thing and you're spending 6 figures on it, but you're only using it for a marketing campaign twice a year. Are you really getting the value out of that excitement that you invested in, and can you leverage that data for other things? And one of the things that we came up with that model that we got excited about is, can we get it in front of our frontline member-facing folks at the credit union? And it's a predictive model. It looks at transaction history and says, maybe this product at the credit union is good for this person because of their history with the credit union and so on and so forth. But being able to find new avenues for that AI-generated data, but bake it into that traditional space to where they're looking at a CRM. We call it member relation because we got to change the name of it. But having it in the CRM to say, here's the member that's sitting in front of you, and here's just it's an AI-driven data point, but it's just this tiny fraction of your dashboard. And you do something with it. You actually take action.
Yeah, so maybe using AI almost to sell the value of some of the existing infrastructure that you already have.
Correct. Yeah, and integrating it in a way that you can leverage and get the value of that investment.
Okay. Laura, what's your opinion?
Yeah, and I love what Ryan was just saying too. It's about the ROI. So I think the conversation to what leaders really care about is, hey, is this going to pay me back? I'm on a number of advisory boards with my peers, our CIO, CDO, CISOs, and the conversation, actually, I watched it, I heard it last year, where it shifted, where it started with a lot of investment into AI, but then mid-year, the conversation changed a little bit, at least that's what I was hearing from my peers on the calls, that, hey, now executive leadership was saying, and what is the ROI? We're spending all this money. So again, how would I address this? And bringing back to, what is it that we're trying to solve for here? What is the business use case, the business value? Is it going to pay us back, or are we going to spend, I don't know, $1 million for 200,000 worth of savings? It's really losing 800,000, right? We're not going to do it just for the sake of doing it. And I would say, as you're having this conversation, probably surround yourself with people that can bring an informed perspective to this. I spent 20 years doing enterprise architecture out of my 30 years total. And what happens when you do enterprise architecture at the enterprise level, you see a lot of technologies. So today we're talking about agentic AI, actually. Last year it was generative AI. Before that it was maybe the data mesh, right? Data lakehouse, Hadoop, big data, Fabric. There's so many things. There's always going to be a new shiny object. I call it buzz du jour, actually. But that, to your point, will be yesterday's news tomorrow. So how do we stay very intentional about focusing on the right things? There is a return, and nobody can know everything, but this is when you surround yourself as a leader with the right people that can give you the right guidance to the questions.
Yeah, so I think focus, being part of the keynote, how do we all apply that to how we think about our roles as leaders in organizations? And I think it's really interesting that focus has to be part of the ongoing perspective with existing investments. What do you think?
Yeah, I think to put it in terms of like the Gartner hype cycle, there's probably Deloitte or somebody would pinpoint it, I'm sure. But for me, we're standing on that peak of inflated expectations, but we can see the trough of disillusionment from here, right? Like when the leaders are going to start to say, "What do you mean AI can't change my light bulb?" Like that's I was looking for it to solve every problem. So I think we're learning, and in my organization, one of the things we're learning is, instead of these huge transformative intercompany tools where security, is still a concern. We're trying to figure out how do we share information when you're exposing it. Really, there's been a focus on personal productivity and the simple things like great meeting notes that really pull out takeaways and summarize things for people who can come. The time, the focus that you're saving from some of these tools is kind of a game changer. But I think it's also like we don't want to pursue hype. We also don't want to be left behind, obviously. But I think in a logistics and a service provider industry, you also have to be aware of the optics that you're pursuing the latest and greatest technology. You can't be perceived to say, hey, we're just going to stick with what works. That's not what we're about. We're about continuous improvement. So we're really trying to look at this from all angles, and that's why the personal productivity comes up. It's not necessarily a brand new optimizing tool that runs on AI. I mean, we'd love to find something like that too, but it's all the angles where AI can help kind of remove some of the sludge that happens just in information sharing and data processing and get us to better decisions faster.
That's great. So I don't know if everybody is paying attention to today's schedule, but Dora is actually going to be our closing keynote today. And her topic is going to focus a lot on how to stay relevant in our space. And I think relevance, part of that is making sure that we communicate our value to our stakeholders. And I think the next question, and I'll drop it to you, Dora, is how do we continue to demonstrate our value as analytics people in the face of some of these other cool technologies?
I think the best thing is to really just speak about value and balance the conversation, right? Because the hype is there, the hype is real, to your point, Nathan. So keep ourselves educated, right? We're talking about literacy now around AI. But I would say we have an opportunity here to help shape the conversation. At the end of the day, we want our businesses to thrive. We don't want to spend $1 million to make $200,000 because then we're losing, right? So how do you shift the conversation into what's really of benefit here? Bring in that informed perspective, keep up to date with what's happening, but then translate it back to value. And how is this going to help the project, the team, the organization? How it connects back to the strategic business goals of the organization.
Sounds great. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely hyper-focused on constantly kind of showing the value we're delivering for our customers. And I think trying to find that balance with some of this more recent technology, it can be tricky. So, I mean, we do try to protect against that as well. Like, are we exploring all the options? Are we looking for the positive ROI? And what I think it really comes down to is it's not an all or nothing thing. Like, if coming from an auto background in our industry, it reminds me of like the example of EVs, right? There's been a lot of talk and a lot of growth in the EV segment over the last, decade or so, probably longer. And there's some that tried to take huge swings, right? And say, we're going all EV, we're going 100%. And that presents its problems. There's the other side that'll say, hey, I don't think there's any place for this, it's not the solution. The answer is somewhere in the middle, that progress is better, better is better. And so whether it be full fleets of EVs where the use cases apply, or even just increased miles per gallon from like tools that like harvest energy from the drive shaft and use that to extend the range of the vehicle. It's the same here. We're not looking to present our value as like, hey, we're going to get you to an all AI future. We're just going to say, hey, we're going to find the right balance that improves your position and leads to better performance.
I think one thing that I look at for value is don't forget about the people in the trenches and the small wins. And what I mean by that, there's a lot of big swings that people can take with analytics in general. They want to solve executive problems. But I find I spend a lot of time in solution architecture and building solutions for people. And the last month, I've been working with our physical security team of 5. And they had a very laborious process for tracking unusual activity. And I built them a really quick dashboard based on a SharePoint list that took about 20 hours worth of work for that team, and it took me 2 hours to build. And those are the types of value-added things that if you just, like Gemba, just go look, go talk to people, go see what's happening, and don't forget about the small wins that you can make an impact that bubbles up through the organization. That's another added value that you can use those demos for bigger conversations at the executive level to say, here's an example of, here is something that you can do that changed people's work. And even though it's a small team, it would have never made a project plan or some kind of priority list with a PMO, but we were able to do it through a little bit of work. And like I said, there's a lot of value in doing that if you can get a lot of small wins. So that's my slant.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's been an interesting, last 20 years or so, working with different, customers and colleagues, having an if you build it, they will come type of mentality in our space. I think particularly in the data warehouse space, there's a lot of emphasis on let's just put everything in the data lake and then hopefully people get value. But I think as this whole conversation seems to be about value this morning, I wonder, would it be interesting to the audience here to maybe talk about how your organization measures value, within the context of kind of the traditional way of doing things that people can use as a takeaway for today? Maybe Nathan, if you want to get that a swing.
So how do we measure value in the context of this? I mean, we're an outsourcing company, right? Ryder, we don't manufacture things, we provide services, and we try to make businesses run better from a supply chain standpoint so they can focus on what they deliver, right? What they build. And so I think owning that fully, it used to be all about cost savings, right? In my engineering days, it was like, what's your year-over-year pipeline? How much have you reduced our spend by? But really, especially in view of AI, data analytics, it's more about the efficiency of that spend. I mean, when we've had customers for sometimes 20, 30 years, we're a victim of our own past successes, right? We're like, I'm sorry, there's not that much waste I can take out of this supply chain anymore, but if I can demonstrate to you that it's running efficiently, and if we slice it 6 ways, you can't see any waste, I can't see any waste, or minimal, I should say, never any, but that's kind of how we demonstrate value, is seeking out those points of improvement, hopefully minimizing them, and really showing that to our customer every day.
So Ryan, how does your team measure value?
I'll answer it by saying, I think if you're not using data in process and really embedding insights and analytics and data in a process in an organization, it's really hard to kind of calculate out that value and see it as you're going through all the processes. And not all organizations know how to be data-driven, even though they like to say they're data-driven or they're insights-driven. And so for me, data-driven means you're every day in process X, and to your point about waste, right? How are you making your processes more efficient by analyzing data and embedding data into those processes to truly be data-driven? And that's when, at least from my experiences, that's when we've demonstrated our value. When I was at a manufacturer for a large majority of my career, profitability analysis was a hunch. It was a gut feeling. It was a guess. And they spent 60 years on that guess, making money. And when we started doing true analysis of profitability on product and location of manufacture, eyes were open, and of course they were like, your data's wrong. Like, we know we make a lot of money on that. And we were like, no, well, yeah, kind of don't. Like, I think Starbucks is taking advantage of our pricing. And we were able to show it. And that transformed sales. It transformed manufacturing. It did transform how we looked at how we manufactured our products. And so those are the types of things, like small and big examples of value. I mean, it's going to be hard to calculate a ROI on profitability analysis and the impact to the organization that had. But I can imagine, being able to, on the one Starbucks contract, being able to renegotiate. I know that was 7 figures. So those are the types of things to think about when value. It's really hard to calculate. You can spend a lot of time calculating it, but doing and seeing output and outcomes is probably a better way to measure that value.
It's funny you mentioned the the data shows up in the dashboard and everybody's surprised. I've been in so many of those meetings throughout my career where the first iteration of the dashboard, people are like, no, that's not right. And then they learn that it actually is. We've been doing this way by gut feel over the years, so that's very interesting. Dora, how do you measure value in your practice?
So when I think of value, I think it goes right back to the culture, how we're thinking about it too. When I think about measurement, metrics about how we're doing well, right? Usually the organization, we're either cutting down costs, or we're mitigating some risk, or we're generating new growth, right? New revenue streams. I don't know that every organization actually has a well-organized way around, hey, how do we focus on the right projects? How do we prioritize what matters? That maps back to some of those business objectives, business goals. But I would say it starts with that conversation, understanding what are those goals, and then almost backtracking from there. And if there is a project coming through that's prioritized, thinking ahead, what are the data points perhaps that I would need to keep track of so that I can actually successfully measure that we are cutting cost, that the customer satisfaction is going up, that the back orders have actually, gotten better, right? And that also connects right back to those strategic goals that we have as an organization, because we want to keep on being profitable and doing well as an organization. So what I would add is, be intentional about it. Think ahead of time. Like a lot of times, and I've seen this in 30 years, I've done it, it was a lesson for me, right, in my career. So many times, there's so much going on, there's so much pressure, and everybody wants to just jump into building that we're starting, and then towards the end we're saying, okay, and how are we gonna measure that? And that it's actually the wrong way to go about it. Because to do even better and to deliver something that we can communicate about, no, this was actually valuable, here's the metrics, we need to start from the beginning, because first of all, when we know how we're going to measure things, then we're more confident that we're focusing on the right things for the organization, not on whatever the hype and the buzz is, because that's not going to keep us thriving. But we're focusing on the right things, the right priorities for the organization. We're thinking about it. We're capturing along the way. We're creating our benchmarks, and just making sure that we're connecting it back. So to me, the biggest takeaway, start that thought process and putting those hooks in the process of executing early on so that we can measure on the right things.
So basically, make sure that you understand what your value equation is before you do the project.
100%, yeah. And actually, if we were doing that, then we would find out that, again, it's not one solution fits everything. So maybe AI can help, but it's now the solution to everything. Maybe some things are simpler. And I want to, if I may, I just want to highlight something that came through the conversation, that we're talking about analytics. Data is key to analytics. This is an end-to-end process, right? This is not just the dashboards. This is not just the warehousing. This is all the way upstream, sourcing the data, cleansing it through, making sure that we have the right data to do the analytics on top of it, right? So even in the conversation that we're talking about before about how to present this, how to talk about this, right? This is what we can say, you know what? Yeah, we can do AI. Perhaps what we're doing is pulling in a tool set that does machine learning that can actually go and figure out all of the same data out there, even though you call it item here and you call it product there, we don't know that it's one and the same thing, right? But use machine learning, or use machine learning for some data quality. But those are, and we said it here, right, different pieces in the whole end-to-end process. And we're still sticking with leveraging everything we know we've done for the rest of the process. And gradually we're bringing in the benefits, which go to productivity benefits as well, from this new technology.
So one of the things that I find successful sometimes, and I love the idea about planning things out, having the ROI, having what the KPI metrics, but just we call it data detective work, but just that experimentation, that data sciencey stuff. One of our big, I would say, wins using machine learning, large language models, is just yes, as a credit union, we do care about member feedback in all channels. And we analyzed and brought it all in to Snowflake. If you haven't talked to Snowflake, they're out there, they're great. And just ran some data science experiments to categorize sentiment analysis and find out what our members were saying from social media and our formal surveys and stuff like that. And it was eye-opening, and it was actionable. And there was lots of insights to be gained. But it's that kind of experimentation mentality to go in front of the leadership and say, hey, we ran this experiment last week. There was no project, there was no ROI, there was no anything. We just thought it was interesting and cool, and we decided to do it. And this is the output. And here, you can go click around and play with it and filter it and get your hands on it and see what you think. And there's been a lot of success with just that kind of experimentation to say, what do you want to do with it next? We could throw it away. It's no big deal. But it was that type of idea generation, kind of brainstorming that was super exciting. So don't be afraid to experiment.
It's interesting something you said there, because we talk analytics, data, AI, it all sounds very numerical. But what you described about sentimentality, like or customer sentiment analysis, the language is where I see, at least in my experience, I've seen 90% of the activity. And I begged my team or our AI people for like, hey, show me something that's calculating things and working out math problems. And like, am I crazy here? But they're like, no. One of our best use cases, I think, was with Costco, and we get, Costco gets thousands of surveys and ratings and complaints and all these things, and by harvesting all the language, which, in the old days, a person would have to sit there and read all those, right?
We were.
Yeah. So like, by using the AI to analyze the language and the points of the shipment and all this, we could actually point Costco towards the more vulnerable elements of their supply chain, these segments that were causing the most damage. And there was a measurable decrease in damages and returns by going from this language-based analysis to their actual supply chains. I thought that was an interesting conversion.
Yeah, I think language and free-form text has been our biggest success with a lot of application of machine learning and AI, because, like I said, people were manually going through thousands and thousands of comments every month to try and determine, is there something to be done here? And we can aggregate that, and it wasn't very hard at all. It was a short experiment that turned into a pretty successful solution.
Yeah, that's very interesting how this all sort of ties together. And I think, our last formal question for today is really kind of taking all of that perspective and harnessing it into polishing our crystal ball. So in the next 3 to 5 years, obviously a lot of things are going to change. It's impossible for us to predict the future. But, to ask the question of, what do you think is likely to happen in our space? Is like, what's the number one-ish innovation that's likely to happen? Or what's the one thing, the most important thing that's missing out of our space from either a tools or a technology perspective? Any thoughts to answer either of those questions?
I think the one thing that I'm most excited about is getting out of report writing. And one of our initiatives I've put on our roadmap for the next couple of years is we get a lot of curiosity questions. What was our membership in 2018? What was our trend of loan balances over the last 5 years? I want that to be chatbot. I want that to be somebody that if you're an executive at a conference and you want to pull up a stat, you can just chatbot it and get it instantly. And I want to focus my team on modeling. I want to focus my team on building models to back end either the chatbot or the AI or the next big things. And the noise from all of the reports and the data curiosities, I want to go away. And I want to automate that. And that's what I'm excited about. I think we're still a few years away from being able to build a model that can interface with an agent like that. And I'd love it to be voice at some point, but again, you gotta take what you can get at the time. But that's what I'm excited about for the future, is getting my team out of, the teams from the CEO asking this question, and you're like, oh, now I got to drop what I'm doing, switch gears like what we talked about the first hour, answer the question, and then go back to the complex model that I was building for our acquisition for next month.
Yeah, it feels like it's right around the corner, but maybe not. But it'll be fun to see.
I think it's kind of, if I could, lack of a better term, building some humility maybe into the AI, because one of the features that somebody out in the hallway might be able to help me with, but like, what drives me crazy is that it won't not answer you. It'll give you an answer no matter what. We play with it. We have an in-house like Rider GPT, and I'll just ask it like, who is Jeff Kozlowski, who's my boss? And he's a VP, but it comes back, he's the chief information officer, and it's like it wants to grasp an answer. So to me, I love the idea of like an AI Jarvis that you just talk to and ask questions, but I would love it to show its work and say, okay, our revenue in 2019 was this, and that's based on this annual report. If you want to look at it, you can kind of verify it, because we're still building trust in all these tools, right? In smaller stake situations. So yeah, an AI chatbot that could actually say, I don't know, would be fantastic.
Yeah. Or here's the dashboard to go look.
Yeah.
I love this, and I love what you said, hearing Ryan about, hey, what excites you is really doing the model. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about AI. It's a lot about processing data, right? And the model is kind of like the map of this data. It's the context of what these bits and bytes mean. So to me, when I'm thinking about it, is, yeah, how do we put more emphasis into really understanding our business and modeling our business, which also means that where we have an opportunity is to also make sure that we're working cross-functionally together and we are understanding really the business, because not any one part of the organization knows everything, and everything is so integrated that we really need to understand end-to-end the processes and the implications and the upstream, downstream, what the impact is. So to answer your question from before, what I hope really would happen, right, because we don't know exactly, and there'll be more AI infiltrating all our processes, but I think what we have the opportunity is to spend even more time, more emphasis, be more serious about, hey, how do we collaborate around consistent goals across our functions so that what we feed AI that can really process at scale and fast here, it's actually the right stuff and understands our reality, our organizations, because we've then taken it back to model it. And AI tools can help with the modeling too, but it starts with us really bringing in the business knowledge and working together across lines.
So it's super interesting. Kind of the goal of this whole conversation for this session anyway was to try to not talk about AI as much as possible, yet it's probably more than half, which is, I think, a harbinger for what's actually happening. So it is entering our everyday lives. We still need to make sure the data is of high quality. We still need to make sure the data flows through and there's no breakages. But a lot of important insights, and I appreciate it. We do have some time for a few questions, if anybody has a question for the panel.
Thank you, Scott. Hi, my name is Mark Fisher. Nice to meet you guys. My question is, I have a team that supports 5 different C-suite executives, and what I've found is 2 of them are incredibly creative, data-oriented, and we do about 90% of our work with those folks. It just happens that the other 3 just aren't as innovative, aren't as ready for data. As we continue to even go forward into things like AI, I'm worried that those other 3 folks will get even further left behind, and the more innovative leaders will really be driving more of the work as we go forward. I don't know if you all have experienced any of that as well. And then the second part of my question or comment is, when we're talking about measuring value, we've struggled to measure just exactly what does our team contribute to the overall enterprise, but when we look at things, we've gotten embedded into strategic initiatives where they couldn't execute the strategic initiative without our analytics and reporting. So just looking at how dependent the initiatives were on our work lends us sort of a measure of value. So anyway, just want to throw that comment out there and see if you all had any comments.
To the first point that you made, we run into it all the time trying to get a level playing field for folks. We continue to work through our data governance function to build data literacy. And I think I spend probably 20 hours a month at leadership meetings and in departmental meetings because we have to build data literacy and bring some of those folks that are struggling. And that's where the experimentation was really nice, to be able to show and tell, because people can hear things, see slides, but until they actually see a working example on their space, that's when things sometimes click. And so being able to work with them on a creative solution that they're talking about their process, and this is where I go back to process integration. They're talking about their process because they know their processes, but they don't necessarily know how they leverage data in that process or how they could have insights into their day in that process. But then you can start bringing them just with some prototypes of examples and say, this is your data in your process, in your world, and these are some of the things, and then you take time to explain what you did and why. And that's been super helpful, at least in my situation.
So to the first question, just an idea to offer here is that the leaders and the teams that are not as engaged, from experience, I would say that if you really want them to get engaged, I would say, what is it that really hurts them by not being part of it? So it's really just thinking a little bit and making more concrete for them. By them not being there, maybe it's okay, maybe they don't care, but maybe they don't care because they haven't realized what they're missing out. And how does it become then a higher priority for them? Now, that's not an easy thing, right? But it's just one of those things that, for me, because I've run data governance and just data functions throughout, and it was a lot of change management. So whatever the use case is, right? Every stakeholder is different. Every question you're trying to answer is different. But the one thing that I know was helping me when I was trying to bring people along, the onus was on me, if I was the one that wanted them to be part and engage, to learn more about their business and then try to find those very relevant examples that connect right back to what they're doing, to say, hey, that's great that you don't want to do this, but do you realize XYZ is happening? Or do you realize that if you actually are part of this, this is what you're getting back? So it's connecting it right back to what is it, where is it that they heard most, and how would they benefit?
And I don't think either one answered maybe your second point there, but just a real quick comment. I think there's definitely still a lot of credibility and dependence on those analytics. So I think everyone's secure in that. It was funny when we were prepping for this, I had to ask Scott, I'm like, wait, when we say old school analytics, are we talking about like the cloud-based platforms that I had to get on just 7 years ago or so? Like, is that old school? He's like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about here. Tableau, Power BI. Like, all right, just clarifying.
Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. I think there was one up here.
So you talked a little bit about AI tools in your environments, right? And the importance of sizing and sort of placing those in the spots where they're most advantageous. Could you speak a little bit to dealing with sort of business personnel or executive leaders who are still sort of at the top of that Gartner hype cycle, who would very much like a GPT to do whatever thing, whether it fits or not, and sort of experiences you've had? I mean, I'm not going to prescribe the end of that conversation, but just like how has that gone for you, and what have the outcomes been?
I think what I'm trying to guard against, at least within my organization and with my senior leadership, is A couple things. One, that you don't make the tools too opaque, right? You have to have the team that, your team has to know how and why things work to a degree. We suffered from that a while back when we would, have big access databases with buttons that really sped things up and automated, and then the second one broke, everyone's like, I don't know what I do here, So we're like, you can't have it be that. There have to be fallbacks. There have to be, contingencies, and secondly, to something Ryan said earlier, to really take into account the right balance with that front line of decision makers and operators, and say, you can't design tools that are going to try to change their decisions without understanding why they make those decisions in the first place. You can't force things that way. It's just not going to work. But conversely, you can't go too far the other way and just say, well, let's just train the model on what the operators do today, because then you just have a model that reinforces the status quo. So it's a tricky needle to thread.
All right, so we are at time. I want to thank everybody for coming out to this session this morning. Again, Dora is going to be speaking at the end of the day. I did order bad weather, so you can stick around. No golf this afternoon. But I want to give a round of applause for our panelists. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good rest of your day.